Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dina Romero, and I'm the leader of Bath and North East Somerset Council. So welcome to the presentation on Bath Transport Delivery Action Plan. So I'm joined today by my colleagues on the Cabinet, Councillor Joanna Wright and also Councillor Neil Butters, who are joint cabinet members for transport services. I'm also joined on this webinar by Chris Major, who is the Assistant Director for Highways and Transport, and Gary Peacock, who is Deputy Group Manager, and also Nick Simons, who is Principal Transport Planner. So welcome to you all. So, as you know, Bath and North East Somerset Council has declared a climate and ecological emergency. And as part of this, we need to radically rethink the way we get around if we're going to reach our goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. So we need to think differently. We need to cut congestion, we need to reduce our emissions, and we need to become less reliant on our cars and take public transport or walk or cycle more instead. So the Transport Delivery Action Plan for Bath is the next step in achieving these goals. The aim of the plan is to identify deliverable transport solutions that can be delivered and developed over time, providing the opportunity to create better connected, healthier and more sustainable communities to live and work in. I'm sure many who have joined us today will be aware that there are a number of consultations taking place on transport within Bath and North East Somerset, but this particular piece of work is around engagement, which will allow stakeholders to have a say on the city's transport system over the next decade. And it's really important for us that we hear your views so we can collate them and actually map a way forward. So whether you live in the city or travel into Bath for work or leisure, this consultation is your opportunity to have your say and help shape transport in the city over the next decade. So I'd now like to move on and ask Chris Major if he'd like to give a presentation on the action plan. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Dina. So to be able to set out what we're going to achieve for the Bath Transport Action Plan, we really need to set the plan within our strategic framework. As you've already heard, since we declared a climate emergency, we've recognised that a step change was needed in the way we think about transport in Baines, and of course all its immediate adjoining areas. So what does this mean in reality? The Climate Emergency Progress Report considered by full Council last year indicates that for transport to achieve the required reduction in emissions, we need to oversee a major shift from private cars to more sustainable options. For example, we need to see a 25% cut in car and van mileage per person per year, or a 7% reduction in overall journeys by 2030. The challenge of this scale of change brings forward is significant, and therefore we need to fully consider the options we have available for us. I have to be honest, the climate emergency declaration is for us in the transport sector both the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge we've ever faced. However, we can't just hide from the reality that for many of us, the links between what is popular and what is going to be necessary to achieve the change will be challenging. Can I have the next slide, please? So how do we decide what work is necessary and what the outcomes are? As a council, our priorities are set by the administration through the corporate strategy, which was consulted upon in late 2019 and early 2020, before being adopted in February 2020. The corporate strategy clearly aligns all the work we're doing around the climate emergency through to how we prepare to the future and increase our focus on prevention. This is particularly important when we start to consider and understand the links from the transport agenda through to public health, physical inactivity, and obviously air quality in its widest sense. These outcomes are then further defined within the commitments embedded in the strategy, highlighting the sustainable transport aims within walking, micromobility and public transport, and then into the commitment to improve infrastructure and deliver the Livable Neighbourhoods programmes. As all these outcomes are already embedded in the strategy that was consulted upon and publicly adopted through the democratic processes, there are key outcomes by which will be measured at the highest levels, both internally and publicly, and therefore these changes really need to be delivered. Can I have the next slide, please? So in light of the strategies and commitments already in place, we need to consider new ways of providing for the transport needs of all sections of our communities if we're to hit the target of carbon neutrality by 2030. The outcomes from the Transport Delivery Plan for Bath will become the overarching evidence base on which we will identify how we deliver sustainable transport into and around Bath and shape the transport system for the next 10 years, building on the previous work already undertaken. Obviously, the plan will also consider how we can improve transport provision for those travelling into Bath. So hopefully I've sort of set the strategic level, and I'm now going to hand over to Gary to give more detail on the actual plans.
Next slide, please. So thank you, Chris. I think it's important to identify that the delivery plan is undermined by some key documents, our strategies and guidance from government. And what we have is the Joint Local Transport Plan, which was adopted in 2020, and that was built or developed by the four unitary authorities and WECA. And that really sets out the long-term aims for transport out to 2036. We also have the Get Around Bath Transport Strategy, which was adopted back in 2014, but it's very much focused on sustainable transport. And then moving on, we just had back in June, July, the government issued the gear change, which really set, as they said, a bold vision for cycling and walking, and really sets cycling at the heart of everything we do. I think quite importantly, the strategies and the government guidance very much aligns with the corporate plans that Chris had mentioned previously, and that is the real driver is to increase walking, cycling and sustainable transport and helping to reduce car usage. An important aspect of the differential between the transport strategies and the Getting About Transport Strategy plan is that the strategies themselves will identify what we want to achieve and why, but the actual transport delivery plan will set out how we're going to achieve those schemes and what schemes we're going to implement. And that's an important difference. Next one, please. We know that in terms of the need for change, that in Baines, 29% of the carbon emissions actually come from transport. And that very much aligns really with the national, although nationally it's around about 30%. And also, going forward, that there's going to be an increase in the number of people living in the west of England and the number of homes and the number of jobs. And since 2011, we have seen transport demand increase, and it's projected to continue to increase. And I think it's worth just noting that, appreciate that we are where we are with COVID, but during the first lockdown, there was a big drop off in travel demand, about 66% less vehicles on the road. But once that first lockdown was lifted, those travel flows actually came back up within 10% of pre-COVID levels. So the expectation, and hopefully as we move out of COVID, that travel demand will continue to get back to pre-COVID levels. And the evidence does start to indicate that. Next slide, please. In terms of pre-COVID levels of travel, we know we have about 20,000 residents who live and work within Bath, but equally, that virtually doubles with the inflow of people coming from outside of Bath to work. And you can characterize that by the morning peak hour, you see a lot of vehicles driving into Bath. And then in the evening, you see a lot of vehicles exiting. And also interestingly, if you actually looked a lot to the movements in Bath, 1 in 3 journeys actually start and finish within Bath itself. So that's ourselves, residents and businesses going about their everyday work. But that does actually create 1 in 3 of those actual journeys, up to 50,000 movements a day. So interestingly, it does give us lots of opportunities for sustainable options. Next slide, please. And again, some of the benefits, we know physical inactivity can contribute to 1 in 6 deaths in the UK and costs up to 7.4 billion a year. And we know 20 minutes of exercise per day, which we all aspire to these days, which can develop depression or mental health. And also we know that the benefits that physical activity can bring. Next slide, please. So I think the plan gives us a real opportunity to tackle some of the biggest challenges we face today. As Chris mentioned, and Dina, addressing the climate emergency by reducing carbon transport emission, reducing congestion by more people walking and cycling, enhancing health and well-being by that active travel. Again, we've done a lot in terms of air quality, but further improving air quality way beyond the CAS. and reducing inequalities. We know the cheapest form of travel is walking and cycling, and investing in those type of activities is something we should be looking to do into the future. Next slide, please. Right, I will now pass over to Nick Simmons, who will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks, Chris. Work on the Bath Transport Delivery Action Plan started in late 2019 with the production of the Current and Future report, which identifies the existing and future transport issues facing Bath. The Current and Future report essentially forms the evidence base that supports the options that would be taken forward as part of the plan. And a copy of that can be viewed online via the consultation website if you want to take a look. The report sets out some answers to some of the more fundamental questions about transport in Bath, including questions about who, what, why, when, where, and how. So who is travelling? What are the impacts of those journeys? Why do we travel? That's to say, what's the purpose of our journeys? When are we travelling? And perhaps most importantly, where do we travel? These seem like easy questions from the outside to answer, but in reality, when you're dealing on a city basis, they involve gathering and analysing quite a large amount of data. As Gary mentioned in his earlier slides, the data included in the Current and Future report was gathered prior to COVID-19, but we believe that that evidence is still valid, given the expectation that conditions will likely return to pre-COVID levels. And that's again, supported with that traffic flow data within the district, which shows that traffic returned to within 10% of pre-COVID levels as restrictions were loosened at the end of last year. The Current and Future report included a number of key findings. We've included two of them at the bottom of this slide, which are quite key. It identified that congestion still poses a major issue for the city, including detrimental impacts on air quality, residents and businesses. But also the reduction in traffic volumes within Bath don't just need to be continued, but accelerated in order to meet the requirements of the climate emergency. Next slide, please. Thank you. So following on from identifying the transport issues facing Bath, we are now developing a plan that will identify the transport measures needed in the short, medium and long term up to 2030. As part of this process, we want to hear from as many people as possible about how we can best deliver sustainable transport in and around Bath and essentially shape the city's transport system for the next 10 years. The council has launched, as part of this, a public consultation to ask people for their opinions on a number of transport themes, which you can see here. So, for example, just picking a few out here, there's better bus services, providing better pedestrian access, supporting cyclists, and so on. As well as these themes, the consultation also asks for feedback on more detailed transport concepts that sit underneath each of these themes, such as removing traffic from the city centre, the provision of local transport hubs, more dedicated cycle routes and better accessibility for blue badge holders and so on. From this consultation, we're really hoping to get a much better understanding of what people want to see in terms of transport improvements in Bath, which will then feed into the measures put forward in the plan. The closing date for the consultation is the 1st of March. Next slide, please. It's important to note, as well as focusing on those measures and that package of measures that we'll be developing, there will be, as part of the plan, a detailed evidence-based study into what is possible in terms of a mass transit system in Bath and what would ultimately work best for the city. The study will be undertaken alongside the work that is currently underway, being carried out at a regional level to look at a West of England mass transit system, and work with that carries on both between Baines and our colleagues at WECA and the other unitary authorities in the West of England. Next slide, please. Yes, the council, as you're probably aware, have a variety of projects currently underway across the district, including, for example, livable neighbourhoods, the clean air zone, the bus strategy, e-scooters, and also electric vehicle charging. These projects are seen as complementary schemes, and they will form a part of the overall Transport Delivery Action Plan, including the contribution they each make to reducing overall carbon levels. So the Bath Delivery Action Plan will sit and wrap all of those schemes up in one. A full list of these complementary schemes can be viewed again on the consultation webpage, along with a brief description for each of them. Next slide, please. So in terms of where we are with the Bath Transport Delivery Action Plan, we are currently undertaking the first consultation. So this is the first of two. The information from this will then be used to help us develop a set of transport options for Bath. Once this is completed, we will then be launching a second consultation, public consultation, in the summer of this year on those targeted transport options being considered before finalising and then agreeing the Transport Delivery Action Plan during the autumn of this year. After this, the plan will be used to help us support funding bids for the delivery of the schemes that have been identified. And those bids would be made both to DFT and central government, but also WECA as well. And next slide, please. So there we are. So just to say thank you for listening, and we'll move on to some questions, I think. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much to Chris and to Gary and to Nick. And my apologies, Nick, I think I may have mispronounced your surname. But I guess one of the key questions here is, why do we need a plan? We seem to always be making a plan. Can't we just get on with something? So I don't know who wants to perhaps start that off. Perhaps I might bring in one of my cabinet colleagues to talk about why do we need yet another plan? Joanna.
I think we recognise that we're in a new place with the climate emergency, and that there has to be new ways of thinking. And because of that, we've got a whole load of, as Nick has said earlier, a packet full of measures happening across not just the city, but across the region. And we need to pull this together in a way that is a plan to deliver this. So I think the council has been very good at putting together strategies over many years and then never actually delivering anything. So this is actually about a plan to deliver the strategy rather than another strategy document. And that's why it's really important.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And the next question is, and I think this fits in with the words that I said at the beginning about how we seem to have an awful lot of things being consulted on. So how will this plan fit with other projects, such as, for example, mass transit that I know that you referred to in your presentation, and just picking up perhaps on a couple of points that have been raised in the question and answer piece in this webinar. How does it fit with the work that West of England are doing? WECA, for example, on Saltford train station, sort of bus services and pieces of work like that, as well as things that are more local to us in the city, such as the city centre security measures that I think have literally just been the consultations finished on, as well as livable neighbourhoods. So perhaps Chris or Gary, would you like to make a start on that rather long-winded question?
Thank you. So the plan itself will take account of the issues you've raised. So in terms of the WECA level schemes, we do work with WECA quite closely, and as those schemes are emerging, or those projects are emerging, they will be taken into account. And I think it's at two levels. Is one, you have, as they start to develop some of these longer term schemes, they will form part of our emerging plans. But underneath of that, I think we're also talking about existing projects. And so an example of that will be, we would call the livable neighbourhoods, which we see as a policy that's now been adopted, and that will start to be rolled out during 2021. and that will be included as part of what we would call a complementary scheme, which will be included within the delivery plan. So we will identify livable neighbourhoods as progressing, and we'll also be taking account of more detailed schemes such as the city centre security measures, and potentially any works that we are proposing, because we won't be stop doing works. We will be continuing to deliver schemes such as, you know, our walking and cycling schemes, residents parking zones. So all those schemes will still continue, but we will be taking account of them as we produce a plan. Plus, we'll also be taking into account the emerging projects and those studies which are starting to come from WECA, which are some of the larger projects, such as bus infrastructure and mass transit.
Can I just pick up on that point that you raised at the beginning about consultation? I think one of the things that also is useful to articulate is that the council is often accused of just taking part in consultations and then it being a tick box exercise. As you can see, has been clearly outlined. We've got several consultations going over the next year on this whole piece of work from the beginning through, because we really recognise that the voice and the vision across the community is needed to develop this piece of work, and how we shape this is important for all of us. You know, what the future looks like, none of us knows, but we do know there is a real threat with the climate emergency, and how we pull together as a community to think about what that future could be and what that future could look like and how it will help many people is important. So this consultation is a process of engagement over the year in lots of ways, and this is really just the beginning part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And I guess, you know, we also need to consider, how does this fit with the local plan refresh that is also being consulted on? Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Tina. So I think that the local plan itself is, as you say, is a partial update to the local plan, and that very much updates some of the core strategy and the placemaking plan, and it reflects the policies. And as I say, those policies very much identify what we want to achieve, and they reflect very much in terms of what we're asking for in our transport strategies. However, the transport delivery plan will identify how we will deliver. So I would see the placemaking plan and the local plan update identifies what we want to achieve in terms of parking reductions or vehicle usage, and the transport delivery plan will identify how we're going to achieve it. As Nick says that will be coming out in June 2021 or the summer of 2021. Following this consultation, we will develop those concepts and come back with more detail of how we're going to achieve this.
Thank you. I guess one of the key points is, although there are a lot of consultations taking place at this moment, you know, please make sure you do take part in the consultations. I know that we've put the consultations that are to do with transport all in one place, so that should make things somewhat easier in order to, you know, that we can accurately get your views on the right thing that you want to express those views on. I just sort of trying to quickly whiz through both the chat and the question and answers. Could I ask people to try and put your questions in the question and answer section? It just makes my life just a little bit easier, so I try not to miss anybody. So, okay. So there's, you know, several points about, you know, what else can the council be doing, and particular point around why this is centred in Bath, and why it's not considering the outside of Bath, particularly around commuter traffic, and those that might be just coming into the city for, you know, one specific reason. So I don't know if Nick, you could pick that up for me.
Yes, of course. We definitely acknowledge, obviously as a World Heritage Site, Bath attracts large numbers of people from outside of the city each day for leisure, education, but especially work. So as well as improving connections around the city, the plan will also consider how we can improve transport provision for those travelling into Bath from outside of the city. It's also worth mentioning we have a lot of longer term plans in terms of improving the main routes into the district and how we can link those rural communities to these from Wiltshire, South Gloucestershire and Bristol, including, for example, the A4 corridor from Keynsham, as well as the Summer Valley. So we do acknowledge that there is a need for us to look at those routes into Bath. I think the report that I referred to, looking at the issues of Bath, identified that somewhere in the region of 75%, 3/4 of the cars travelling in the morning are into work are doing so from outside of Bath. So there is a real need for us to include that within this Bath delivery action plan. Absolutely.
Thank you. And I assume, so some of the work that's going on about mass transit will also be very applicable to rural areas, as well as those that are coming in from other towns outside of our authority too. I don't know if anybody wanted to speak specifically about perhaps rural transport. Oh, Gary, you've unmuted, so I'm assuming you would like to speak.
So in terms of the rural transport at the moment, I know there's been talk about buses and the way we take that forward, but WECA have got a forward plan in terms of infrastructure, which is looking at the main corridors. And these main corridors we identify as being the A367, that's the Somer Valley link back into Bath, the A37, the Somer Valley into Bristol, the A4 corridor, that's Bristol to Bath, and also out into Wiltshire. And they will be looking at how we can improve those walk-in, cycling and public transport routes along that corridor, but equally how we can start linking the rural communities back into those key corridors. And that may be by transport hubs, walk-in, cycling, or some other type of innovation, and even localized bus routes. And all those options will be developed as part of those studies as they come forward. In terms of the mass transit, the West of England mass transit very much focused on the link between Bristol and Bath, and the mass transit study will very much focus on the key urban areas, because that's where mass transit tends to be focused on because of the number of residents that actually live within that vicinity. So the mass transit, as I say, will link Bristol to Bath and will focus mainly on the urban area of Bath itself. Thanks, Dina.
Thank you. And I think that sort of brings us to the question of trams that has come up a few times, both in the chat and in one of the pre-submitted questions. I won't read the full extent of the pre-submitted question, but I think it is, basically asking, are trams going to be part of the mix? Nick.
Hello there. Sorry, I unmuted. Sorry. Yes, essentially, yes. The Bath Transport Delivery Action Plan will identify undoubtedly a number of different transport measures to provide an overall package of transport improvements for the city. And part of this will include, as I said, a detailed evidence-based study into what is possible in terms of mass transit in Bath, but also what would actually work best for that study. So that will investigate a whole host of various aspects of mass transit, including the various different types that are available, the alternative power options, obviously alignments, how mass transit can complement improvements to walking and cycling, potential demand for mass transit, levels of revenue that would be generated, deliverability, affordability. So there's a whole range of things that we could potentially look at as part of that detailed study, and will do. And that will obviously sit alongside and within that Bath Delivery Action Plan.
Thank you very much. So I'm just having a little look now about, so I think we've got a few sort of more specific questions that perhaps we could pick up. So for example, the first question on the assumptions that have been made in the presentation. So what if all vehicles were electric? Would that make any difference to our carbon emissions and the you know, the assumptions made on the fuel in the vehicle reduction figures, Chris?
Thanks, Dina. Yeah, obviously the figures are set out within the full report that was submitted to full council, or the detailed breakdowns within it. If we move towards a higher level of EVs, then there are some reductions in CO2, but you know, there is no vehicle without impacts on the environment. They all have a greater or lesser impact, and that's everything from the manufacturer of that vehicle through to the lifespan, how it's held, through to particulates from brake dust and tyre wear, and the impacts going forward. So the full details are within the report. If you'd like to have a look, that was taken to full council rather than going into the detail at this time.
Thank you very much, Chris. So, sorry, I'm just quickly, as I said, trying to whiz through. Okay, there's a question here about, you know, how can we provoke greater EV take-up? And I guess coupled to that is, how do we encourage other forms of transport as well? So that would include bikes, which I believe there's a comment in the question and answer, which is that this seems to be perhaps targeted at better off areas of the city. So how do we make sure that everybody gets equal access to some alternative form of transports, and it isn't, you know, this doesn't open up yet another divide between you know, the better off and less well off parts of the city? I don't know, Chris, if you want to make a start of that, and then I might bring in either perhaps Neil, who's unmuted and looks ready to go as well.
Thanks, Dina. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, isn't it, when you start to look across the transport options for all the different areas of the city. We know there are significant impacts. We know people in the lower quartile of income bands are less likely to have a car, yet they suffer the impacts of car movements on a regular basis, be that air quality or the impact on their communities as a whole, the disconnect they get with living around major routes and similar. So I think the short answer is, this plan helps us bring forward opportunities for people to move in a different way. We're supporting strongly through our complementary measures ways to improve options for walking, cycling, supporting public transport, and this piece of work brings forward the opportunities for mass transit in new ways over that period. Without a doubt, as we touched on earlier, the climate emergency means we've got to change the way we move to deliver the carbon neutrality. But beyond that, there is a whole issue around the social justice of transport and how people do it, about making sure that those who have no option but to move differently are not disconnected from facilities within the city centre and similar. So there is a lot of work going on outside of this particular programme to try and bring forward those opportunities. We also know that COVID-19's had a huge impact on the bus market, all public transport, but particularly the bus market. And as we go forward, central government are bringing forward the bus strategy recovery, bus network recovery strategy to start addressing some of those issues, and that will require us to work really, really closely with colleagues in WECA to try and look at how buses can be supported to deliver what community needs going forward.
Thank you, Chris. And Neil, was I right to assume you wanted to add a comment?
I'll make a comment, if I may. We are, of course, facing a major public health problem here, and the people who will be most affected will likely be many of the more disadvantaged people who live on you know, congested arterial roads and so forth. There is what is particularly worrying, I think, is that if we get back to, if and when we get back to normal, I'm sure we will sometime, the predictions are that traffic could actually increase by a further 40% compared with what it was before lockdown, which is a very worrying issue. Delays could increase by 40%, something like that. So there are lots of reasons why we need to get ahead of this particular project. We talk about the sustainable transport pyramid, putting walking first and then cycling and then public transport, and see what we can do with that. Mass transit is very interesting at the moment. We're being deliberately very non-committal in terms of how that might look in future, because there needs to be a thorough study done, which is being done, and the type of mass transit may change over the years, because to put a light rail system in would take more than a decade probably, and we've got to see whether something can be done along those lines before then, but we need to move in tandem with longer term projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. And then just another group that are often, there's often a suggestion that any work to change how people get about disadvantages, and that's those that have disability, or those that have a blue badge. So what would you say to those groups about this particular plan? I guess obviously making a contribution to this consultation is going to be part of the answer, but Nick, I'm sure you have something else you'd like to add.
Yes, certainly. Thanks, Nina. So we are really very keen to understand and hear from those disabled users and understand what improvements are required to make it easier, safer and fairer to move around Bath, and also getting into Bath from outside. This is why, as part of the consultation questionnaire, we are asking for additional feedback from blue badge holders. So an open text question where people can actually put in some feedback to us, so that we can better understand how our plans may affect the ability of disabled users to get around, as well as to help identify what improvements are required. So we are actively trying to plan and provide improvements for everyone to move around the city and travel into Bath. Absolutely.
Thank you, Nick. And just sort of picking up on those that might be disadvantaged. So I noticed in both the chat and the question section of the webinar that several comments about those people who aren't online, that can't access the consultation online. So is there any provision or any thought about provision being made to enable those people to get their views heard? Nick, again?
Yes, we can provide a hard copy of the questionnaire if you contact Council Connect and request it through there, or ask someone else to email us if you're not online at transportation_planning, or is it transport planning at bathness.gov.uk. I'd need to check that, sorry.
We'll make sure we've got the right information online, which obviously doesn't help those who aren't online, but we'll hopefully we'll be able to get that information to those people.
And get in touch with your ward councillor, because all ward councillors will know about this piece of work and will be able to direct you to the best way of getting to be able to take part in the consultation. So please get in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And also you have put on into the chat how to access the whole range of consultations as well, and we'll make sure that that's added to this webinar when it goes onto our YouTube channel as well. Okay, so as I said, jumping around just a little bit here, so there's some talk as well about people's thoughts around things like e-scooters and e-bikes and bikes in general. Is this consultation the right place to discuss or share your views on those alternative modes of transport? I'll stick with you, Joanna. What are your thoughts?
Please, I mean, we really want to hear lots of people's ideas about what they think are the issues that stop them getting around sustainably, and what they think could be the improvements to help them make those decisions. So we're really looking for what we're calling a vision and a way to validate that vision through the next few years And that's the very reason for this consultation now and over the next year about how we take this piece of work forward.
And actually, just picking up on the accusation that's been made, I think in the chat, or maybe it was in the question and answer, about, you know, those people who aren't online, how do they hear about these things when we're only talking about them online? And just to re-emphasize the point that you've made, Joanna, that obviously contact your ward councillors, and I'd hope our ward councillors would be proactive and make sure that everything that they are putting out to their residents includes reference to the consultations that are happening. Also parish councils as well, you know, they will have they will be aware of these consultations happening, and I know many of them put out newsletters and indeed display some of the consultations that are happening on notice boards in the various villages as well. But I absolutely get the point that's being made, that it isn't ideal, it is difficult, but we will use every tool that we have to make sure that everybody who wants to be involved can be involved. And obviously anybody who is on this webinar, if you're aware of people who aren't able to access this information, then please let us know if you're not able to help them yourselves. So let me have a quick look as well. So again, there's a question about, you know, is this worth doing? You know, as we come out of COVID, there is perhaps an expectation that people will stay with home working. I don't know whether or not that is an assumption that is being made that perhaps ought to be considered. I'm sure it is being considered, and obviously nobody knows what the future is going to look like post-pandemic. I mean, we don't always know what it's going to look like during the pandemic either.
So yeah, I would just pick that up about home working. Yeah, we are going to see a certain shift to home working, but we also still have to recognise what the demographic is. We have a large number of people in this city who go to school. We have a large number of people in this city who use both the universities, whether to teach there or to study. And we have a large number of people who either work or need to attend the RUH. So how are they going to get to those centres? And that's just outlining that core group of people. And I think there's some statistic that says that that's out of everybody and what we do, 70% of people will still need to go to a workplace to do their work, whether it's to make something or serve coffee. There is a large group of people that will endlessly still need to connect, and how we move them around is going to be really important in the future, because if we really are committed to zero carbon, then we have to consider what those options are and what they could look like for everyone.
Thank you. And I guess, you know, one of the things we haven't spoken about here is tourism, and how, you know, in the future, how is that going to affect our city? And indeed, how are the choices that those wanting to come and look at our city, or, you know, experience some of the cultural offerings in the city, how will they get here? And how, you know, can we make sure that we, you know, we obviously don't want to, you know, reduce the numbers. Well, maybe we do, but, you know, I would assume that we don't want to overtly change what the city is, but how does this transport plan, how does that have an impact on their choices? So Joanna, you're still nodding, but I've got Gary who wants to speak. So maybe I'll bring Gary in first, and then you in, Joe.
Thanks, Tina. Well, I think the transport delivery plan gives us the opportunity, as we say, to make much more pleasant places in terms of not dominated by traffic. So we would hope visitors would choose sustainable means to come and visit ourselves using public transport. But actually, once they're in the city, making it a more pleasant environment for people to walk, cycle, and just generally move around, I think should be a bonus for everybody. And I would hope that, you know, a tourist would see the benefits of that as well. But clearly, this is about, you know, include the opportunity to improve people's well-being, and you know, try to encourage more activity through that walking and cycling agenda. So, as I say, hopefully visitors would sort of enjoy that and feel the improvements themselves when they visit the city.
And just to pick up on that too, in terms of the economic spend, it's been shown that people who walk to a city centre spend more money than those people who use a car. There is actually, you know, real data to support that. So if we can create well, I think we have one of the most beautiful cities. We're very fortunate to live in it, I think, for lots of us who do. How we can make sure that we encourage a sustainable way that people move around in that city, whilst people can still get to the edges of it and move around and come in and out. That's really what we need to address, what that looks like and how that can feel good for everyone, whatever their abilities are.
And part of this is making sure that everybody who wants to come to our city knows about the different choices that they can make. And obviously we'll be working with Visit West to promote the area and to promote sustainable transport as well. Because, you know, and I know this point has been made in connection with consultation, but people can't know what the choices are unless they hear about them. And yes, I think the point that's been made about how do you get people to take part in the consultation is very well made, and it is very, you know, it is very challenging in these times when, you know, things like things that you might wish to do, such as a straightforward leaflet to every door, might also not be possible in these times as well. So so I'm just moving back into the questions and seeing if there's anything that has come up that we haven't at least touched on. So yeah, just a quick question about the JLTP4. So Joanna, can you give just a little bit of reasoning about how this fits in with the JLTP4, which is and the JLTP5, which is obviously being worked on at the moment through WECA? So
I'll just explain what the JLTP4 is, because lots of people might not know. So it's the Joint Local Transport Plan, which is a large document that's worked together between the four authorities, be that South Gloucester, Bristol, North Somerset and Bath and North East Somerset, to look at how the whole strategic network sits together. So that was a large piece of work that took several years to go through and was agreed last year in full council and by all other councils as well. But we recognise that it fell short of the agenda of carbon zero. So we are now working towards something called the JLTP5. And again, that will be another high level strategy document. So the WECA basically has a large amount of money that's been devolved from central government down to it to spend. So what we are wanting from this plan is to actually come up with business cases so that we can go back to WECA and those strategic documents and say, this is what we want money for to deliver. And that's the disconnect that has often happened across this authority and other authorities to deliver good plans, is that business case to get money from central government to put those pieces in place. I don't know if Chris wants to follow up on that for me.
Chris?
No, to be honest with you, I think you've hit the main points really of the JLTP and the outcomes for it. I think you know, we're moving into defining what the new situation will be. That's what we want to bring forward as part of this Bath Transport Delivery Plan. It will help focus and set the themes for the future direction of transport. So yeah, I think we're really keen to hear from people, feedback in, and make sure we're hitting the right information to allow us to build the right strategic plans to take transport to where we need to go to achieve that climate neutrality by 2030.
Thank you, Chris. And it'd be useful, I think, now just to talk just very briefly about the difference between clean air and carbon emissions, because I know that was a question quite early on in the webinar.
Chris is the expert on this.
Absolutely, that's why I thought I'd ask Chris.
Yeah, I'm certainly not the expert. My teams are quite clear. When we're talking about the clean air zone, we are talking about NOx as the emissions that we're dealing with, whereas the climate emergency is talking about CO2 carbon. They're very different things, and therefore there is no not necessarily any read across between the plans between the two. We are delivering the clean air zone, which is due to go live on the 15th of March. That will address our NOx, which is a really nasty pollutant and has whole life effects on people. This plan is more is based around the carbon emissions and is longer term to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. So very different things addressed and dealt with in different ways and over different timelines. But the answer is really we have to address and deal with all of the emissions that come from vehicles. We need to look at new ways of moving. And that's before we even talk about the health impacts and on people, the inability for us to see large proportions of our communities taking the levels of exercise necessary, the non-communicable diseases, diabetes, heart attacks, etc., types of cancer that come forward. We know that private cars have impacts. All road transport has impacts on our communities, and we really need to try to move into a new way of thinking for transport. And the challenge is huge. We're not underplaying that at all, but we have to start somewhere, and we need to hear from people first. We need to start getting feedback to address those issues in the right way.
So, and I'll just follow up from what Chris said, because I had it down in my notes about non-communicable diseases. It's really important that we understand that issue right now of asthma, obesity and diabetes are a real issue just with the pandemic, and lots of people who have unfortunately suffered have been people with those issues. So how do we create a healthy community? And having a healthy community is really important to all of us, so that it doesn't economically cost us at a high level through the NHS and the taxes that we pay to make sure that we stay well. And there are simple things, you often hear from people say, I'd like to walk my child to school, but there's too much transport and there's too many cars and I'm frightened of them walking to school, so I'll drive them to school. And we just end up in these vicious loops where people can't make decisions they would like to because of that problem. So what can we do to enable people to have more active lifestyles that then give them better qualities of life and better bodies that will then take them through a life that will be healthy and good? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is not just about transport schemes. This is about delivering a better community and a better way of living for lots of people.
Thank you, Jo. It's absolutely. So it isn't just about different modes of transport. Well, I suppose it is if we include ourselves as one of those options. Can we propel ourselves, using our legs and bicycles, etc. More, but absolutely getting that alternative is not necessarily right for everybody and in every circumstance.
And it certainly isn't. But what has also been shown, for instance, in Waltham Forest with the pieces of work they've done around livable neighbourhoods, is that the amount of pollution that there is locally has gone down significantly, but also in terms of violence, in terms of sexual crime, those sort of things, has also reduced. And also the transport being knocked over or killed on the highway, all of those levels of accidents have gone down significantly. So when we make good intervention that improves the quality of life, not just for those walking and cycling, but also those having to use a vehicle, then that improves everything for the whole community. And I think that's what we're trying to engender and enable through this process.
Thank you. And yeah, I know it keeps on coming up in the chat and in the question and answer about using the post and doing, more to direct all consultations to everybody. I fear that's not going to be isn't viable, simply because there is, if you wanted to get a consultation document to every single house, just in terms of the letter that we sent to residents about the measures that were coming in to do with the first lockdowns. I think that if I remember rightly, the price for that was something like £30,000. I don't think we can do that for every single consultation that is coming through. I don't know whether or not our officers have any additional words they want to add to that. I don't know if they're costed this as a possibility. Nick?
I think it's worth mentioning we did actually have an article in the Bath Chronicle as well, which mentioned the consultation alongside the work that we're doing on the livable neighbourhood. So we have released press statements and raised awareness through the local press and that's something that we can continue to look to do, as well as using a lot of social media to raise awareness via the council Twitter account and other social media outlets. So we are doing as best we, I think, believe, as best a job as we possibly can. If the COVID situation wasn't as it is, I think we'd probably also look to put information in the libraries, but it's not possible to access that information at the moment. So we are trying as hard as we possibly can to make sure that people do hear about the consultation, but aware that yes, we perhaps need to do more in terms of working with the press and local press, and we can do that.
Absolutely. So so we use the radio as well as the local press, and there are different papers and publications in different areas. And as I said before, I know the parish councils also have different ways of communicating too. But it is really difficult, and I think that is accepted by everybody in this webinar, that it is incredibly difficult. So we do need to ask you as well if you can play your part and get those people who might not be able to access this online to take part in the consultation, because it's important that as many people as can do express their views, so that we have a full understanding of what people are concerned about and what they want to see for the future.
So, and just also to let you know that behind the scenes, we recognise that there are key stakeholders across the area who we are directly contacting. So, for instance, schools. We've gone to all the schools. There's a huge list of different bodies and groups of people that we recognise won't be able to get this message across, and we are certainly working behind the scenes on that as well as just the general resident group, if that makes sense. I just raised the issue, Dina, because it was very early on in the conversation, and I think Neil would love to answer it, about why should there be a train station at Saltford?
Thank you, Joanna. Yes, Neil, special subject.
I was just going to ask about that, or say, make mention about that. There have been a few questions in the chat. This has been an ongoing issue for a number of years, and a huge amount of work was done within Saltford, based around the parish council a couple of years ago, which showed a huge proportion of the villagers would actually use it over the course of a week, which was very encouraging. However, Network Rail's attitude was rather negative, it has to be said, and likened reopening of Saltford to putting a roundabout on a motorway. However, their attitude has now changed quite a bit, and the government has set up a fund called Restoring Your Railway, or Beaching Reversal in common parlance. And I think that shows very much a change of thinking. And WECA have prepared a bid to submit to this Restoring Your Railway Fund. This is the third and last tranche that is being dealt with as we speak. So we'll be hopeful. And the whole idea of this is to produce a business case. So if they endorse the fact that there are large numbers of people who wanted to use Saltford Station, that will come out. And I'm pretty confident that there will be a very positive outcome to this. As far as caution is concerned, which has also been raised, that of course we would support, but it's outside our area in Wiltshire, so we have to leave it to them. Thank you. Thank
you very much, Neil. I can't believe it, but we're actually coming to the very end of our webinar already. So I'm going to just quickly ask everybody if they've got any final words. I'm going to start with you, Neil, if I may, and just perhaps pick up one of the general points that's being made about how this is, very Bath-centric, and how, it doesn't include North East Somerset, and what, is there a plan perhaps for the future for a North East Somerset transport action plan?
Well, it was always intended that this plan would be Bath-centric, but also look at the corridors, because you can't ignore the fact that we've been talking about hundreds of thousands of people coming into Bath every day from all corners. And the A367 down to Bradstock is an absolutely classic example. And I'm delighted that we've now managed to identify some other WECA pot that will enable us to look in detail at that corridor and see what can be done in terms of improvements for for cycling, including taking into account, obviously, the 2 tunnels route. I think we've got to be very open-minded and lateral thinking in the way we move forward. But yes, obviously, all corridors coming in from outside must be looked at. We're looking at a concept called the Wiltshire Whippet at the moment, which would be a kind of semi-fast bus service between Chippenham and Bath, because at the moment you just have a very swift train ride, which is great, but a very, very slow bus ride. And there may well be some room for something in the middle with not a big new park and rides, but identifying small car parks along the way and turning them into transport hubs where you could leave your bike or motorbike or car, obviously, and get into town in a much pleasanter way and feel secure about doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neil. So I'm now going to just ask our officers if they've got any additional words they want to add before I allow Joanna to have perhaps the last word. So, Gary.
Just like to say, I think we are at the concept stage, and I'd really encourage everyone to join the consultation, because it really gives us this exciting opportunity about how we can develop the plans going forward for the next 10 years. So if you can enter or fill in the consultation, please do. Thank you.
And encourage others who aren't online to do so too. Nick.
Yes, really just to echo Gary, that this is the dawn of a new age for transport in Bath, as I and others see it. It really is an exciting prospect, and I don't think we've ever been in such a good position to make actual real change on the ground. So yes, please provide us as much feedback as you can through the consultation process, and we look forward to seeing what everyone's comments are.
Thank you very much. And I think some of the questions that we've had will obviously feed into the consultation as well. And if you've asked a question and we haven't been able to get back to you during this webinar, then we will endeavour to do so outside of the webinar, as long as we've got some means of contacting you. So I hope if you've got a question that you've made sure that's attached to perhaps your email. So Chris, I'm sorry, I can't see you on my screen at the moment, so I hope you're still there, ready to answer that last question about, what is the next step for this?
Thanks, Tina. Yeah, so the next step, obviously, we're looking forward to receiving all the responses. We'll consider them. That will then start to form our options appraisal reports for the project, and then we'll be coming back out to public consultation at the end of the summer. I think for me that there's just a couple of key points. We are really serious about addressing the climate emergency. It's embedded within all of our strategies and plans for the council, and we are working really, really hard to make the changes necessary. We didn't get into this space overnight. Lots of times we hear time and time again, how are you going to fix transport? How are you going to address the problems, the pollution, the social justice issue, the health issue? And everybody wants it done overnight. There is no easy fix, otherwise somebody would have picked it up. What we're saying is we're absolutely committed to making those changes necessary. We have strong central government leadership. We have really strong local leadership on addressing these issues. And as a service, as a team, we're absolutely committed to taking it forward. But we can't do it alone. We need people to come with us on this journey. We need people to come with us and give us their views. And we're not all going to like what everybody says. There's going to be such polarized views, a range of views around what goes forward. But we want to hear how people think we could address it, build an evidence base, and then take forward the best options to delivery.
Thank you, Chris. And Joanna, I wonder if you could just articulate again how all of this fits together, and I know there's been several comments about low traffic neighbourhoods and, whether or not, if those would be approved, if they were seen to add more nitrogen dioxide into the air. I wonder, Joe, if you could just pick that up for me.
Sure, yeah, I've been noticing all those comments on the chat there. And what I would first of all say is we have just done a huge piece of work about livable neighbourhoods, of which we had a consultation of which over 1,500 people took part in. And we went through the proper process to go through policy, to get it consulted on, and then to go through cabinet. So one of the things that certainly happened last year in the pandemic is central government very quickly threw money at all local authorities and said, do, you know, active travel quickly. And quite some of those schemes, not all of those schemes, have been thrown out the door because they weren't done properly, they weren't done through process, and they certainly weren't done through consultation with the wider communities to make sure that what was embedded worked for the community and actually had real effect. So the last year has been a learning curve for, I think, for a lot of authorities across the whole of the country about how to deliver transport better. And that whatever we do, as Chris Major has said, there is not a magic wand to fix this overnight. The other thing that's really interesting about coming into this position is just the legality of the highways. And I don't think people realise just how much law sits in place that stops us from doing a lot of the things that everybody thinks, well, that makes sense to do that. Why haven't they done that yet? Because we legally can't, or we have to jump through quite a lot of hoops to make those changes. So I would add that to the mix. So we are committed to make change, and we realise there has to be change. We want to work with everyone across the community to bring that change about. Hence why we are now involving ourselves in, over the next year, a consultation with many parts of the community to hear those voices and to take that piece of work forward. It is not going to be easy. In some cases, the necessary change is going to be unpalatable, to be honest. Lots of people want it just to be easy, and I can't see how the climate emergency makes this easy for anybody. Unless we engage positively with the future, we will continue with our historic approaches. And that's our problem. We have to engage with the future in a new way. And we need to have good discussions with each other, robust discussions, critical friend discussions, but we need to be open to new ways of thinking about what that future could look like. So please take part in the first part of this consultation. I've put up the link. I almost want to do a sort of, here it is below me, in a sort of, what's the dancing program called kind of way, and I'm not. So I would suggest, you know, really, please take part. Tell other people to take part. This is our moment to work together as a community to look for a better way for us to connect through the future in a better way that is sustainable, that helps health, and that also gives a better social justice outcome to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. And can I say thank you to everybody that has put comments and asked questions. As I said, I'm really sorry I've not been able to answer or address every single one of your comments and answer every single one of your questions, but they will be taken into account. We will add them into the consultation, and where it is possible, we will answer your question if we can. I'm just thinking, you know, I suspect there's a whole webinar in highways and the law that we could actually hold. I think that, you know, it would help everyone's understanding of why some things that might seem, you know, blindingly obvious to people just simply can't be done in the way that you think they could be done. So as I said, you know, I'm conscious that we have overrun a little, so thank you everybody for staying with us during this webinar, and thank you too for my panelists, to Nick, to Gary, to Chris, and to Neil, and to Joanna as well, and all of the people behind the scenes that have made this webinar happen. And I hope this has been of interest and you found it useful, and we will put this onto our YouTube channel so that you can look at it again, obviously direct other people to watch it too, but please take part in the consultation, and please make sure that if you are aware of others that are not online, that you either are able to help them or ask us to help them take part. So thank you everybody, and on that note, sorry, I think I'd like to say good night to everybody. Good night.
Thank you.